and welcome to another Lawn Fawn video. Today we're going to be making 3 cards using the new fox costumes before and after stamps. So these foxes are all dressed up for Halloween and they are designed to work with the Magic Picture Changer dies. So we are going to be making a Magic Picture Changer card in this video today as well. But I also love that their costumes are not too Halloween-y. You have that cute fox dressed as a cupcake, which would be perfect for a birthday card, which I'm also going to show you today. I think the fox dressed as a bee would be great for a birthday card. You could substitute it and say Happy Bee Day. So I think there are a lot of ways to use these foxes that are not just for Halloween. So let's get right to the first card today, and I'm going to be using all these little foxes and all their little bird friends and a couple accessories. So I've already cut out and colored my pieces here. You can see just how cute these little foxes are once they are cut out. I just think the one dressed as a skeleton is just so cute. So I'm going to put these aside and we are going to work on our card base. And I'm going to be using the Foursquare portrait die to cut out a frame as well as pieces to go inside the frame. So I've cut the frame out of black and I'm just going to set those pieces aside. I've also cut the frame out of white, and so those rectangles that are on the inside, those I'm going to ink up and use those to create my little scenes inside. So you can see that's going to fit in there perfectly, but I'm going to do some inking first. So I've got out my oxide inks, I've got out some wilted violet, I'm also going to use some blueprint sketch and then a little bit of chipped sapphire. I'm going to be doing the purple at the bottom of each of these little panels. And I'm making kind of a spooky Halloween scene. So I just love using wilted violet for Halloween cards. It's such a vibrant purple, but also has that spooky Halloween feel to it. So next I'm going to go in with the blueprint sketch and I'm going to pull that one down from the top of each of these panels, and then I'll just go back and forth between the two colors and blend that line so that those two colors sort of bleed into each other. And I just love kind of the night sky that these two colors create, but it still has that real vibrance to it. I also put a piece of typing paper under it now so that I can tap off some of that extra ink, because I tend to be very heavy-handed with the oxides, but this way I can get some of that ink off before taking it directly to my paper, which seems to help. And then once I have all those done, I'm going in with the chip sapphire and just doing that top area. I just think this gives it that extra little interest that makes it look like a night sky. Now that all these are done, I can add a little more detail to them. So I'm going in with a white metallic watercolor. I've gotten it all kind of soupy in there. I'm going to pick up some of that watercolor paint and I'm just going to add splatters to each of these backgrounds. So it's kind of like a starry sky. And I actually switched over to a smaller size brush so that I got smaller splatters off of it. And then I'm also going to flick some off the side of a clear block, and that gives you really tiny splatters instead of those big circles. And it just really adds interest and texture and shimmer to these little backgrounds that I've created. Now I've got 2 pieces of some black glitter cardstock. I only cut 2 because I'm going to use both the top and the bottom, but I'm creating the ground for my little foxes to stand on. And I'm just using a wavy border here. So I'm kind of placing my fox on there so I know how far up it needs to go. I'm going to go ahead and cut both of these at the same time. And then I can flip them over and do the same thing with the other side. So this doesn't waste as much glitter. And then I'll just keep that leftover piece to cut small things out of later. So now I'm going to go ahead and add that black frame to my card base. So I'm just using some liquid glue to trace that frame, and I'm going to add it to a white card base. Getting all my little foxes out of the way so I don't get any glue on them. And then now I can add these little background pieces into those slots that that frame creates. So those are going to fit perfectly inside each of these openings because I used the same die to cut out these pieces before inking them. And I just love the look of these dark purple and blue panels with that black frame. Now that all those are in that frame, I'm just going to add that glitter cardstock that I cut to the bottom of each one. You could also cut these ground pieces out of black cardstock, but I actually like the contrast that the glitter gives against the black frame. It makes it stand out just a little bit more. So there are 3 foxes in this set that are dressed up in costumes, and then there's this little guy here that doesn't have a costume. But there are some pieces in this set that allows you to dress him up too, so that you can have up to 5 different costumes. So I'm dressing him as a bat. There's also parts to dress him up as a witch, but I'm actually going to use those on a bird. You'll see here in just a second. So I'm layering those bat wings behind him, and then there's this little headpiece that you can add to him. So now he's all dressed up like a bat, just like his friends here. And then there's also a plain bird in this set that's not wearing a costume. So I'm going to use the witch accessories. There's a little hat and a little broom, and he's going to be flying on the broom so that everybody in this stamp set is now dressed up for Halloween. There's also these cute little gift bags, and there's a tiny little pumpkin face that you can add to them if you want that extra detail. So now to start to assemble my card, I'm using some foam squares in different thicknesses to add the foxes and their cute little friends. So I paired the fox dressed as a cupcake with the bird wearing the donut costume because I thought those 2 little sweet treats needed to go together. And then I'm putting the bee on this other panel, and I just think that one's perfect to hold the bag of candy. I'm adding the little bird dressed as a pumpkin, which I just think is so cute. The fox dressed as a skeleton. I think he's perfect to have the little bird dressed as a ghost as his little friend. And then the fox dressed as a bat, I'm going to add that bird that's dressed as the witch to his panel. And to fill in kind of that little void there, I'm adding that 3rd little treat bag. So now to finish it off with a sentiment, I've cut a sentiment banner from some black cardstock. I've went ahead and added my anti-static powder to it, and I'm going to stamp out the sentiment that says Happy Halloween in clear embossing ink, and then add some white embossing powder and heat that up with my heat tool. So this banner is going to kind of disappear and look like it's part of the frame that we created, and then that sentiment in that bright white embossing is just going to really pop off that background. So I've added some black foam squares to the back of this, and I'm just going to line it up with that center bar of the frame that goes through the middle of the card. And to finish it off, there's these little tiny words in this stamp set that you can kind of use to decorate around and add more interest to your card. So I've added the one that says eek to the panel with the skeleton. There's also one that says yay, which works perfectly with the little cupcake. There's a bzz to go with the bee. And then the last one says boo. And then here is the finished card, and it might be one of my favorite ones. I love making Halloween cards, and I love that background that I created too. So now we're going to work on a Magic Picture Changer card, which this stamp set is designed to work with the Magic Picture Changer. So I'm going to start out with my Magic Picture Changer dies, and I have some pieces of white cardstock cut here. And what I'm going to do is trace the opening where my picture needs to go. So I'm just going to trace this square that is part of the die with a pencil so that I know where to stamp my images. And I'm going to do the same thing with the piece that slides on the inside. So now I know where to stamp my images on my paper. The reason why I trace my squares is so I can do my stamping and all my coloring before I die cut my pieces. So I've just laid my piece in the Misty. This is the little bee. It's going to be stamped on the piece that moves in the middle, so the smaller die cut piece. And I'm also stamping that little treat bag for him to hold. And then I'm going to stamp the regular fox that's not dressed up onto the piece that's going to be the outside pocket. So now I can do my coloring, and I'm just using some oranges here for my little fox. I've got a YR14 and a YR18, just doing some simple shading, and I will color the other fox in the same shades. That way they look like the same fox, and when you pull the magic picture changer, it's like he magically changed into his bee costume. I'm also going to go ahead and color in that bee costume using a black, and I'll use a yellow. I'm using a very pale blue for the wings. A purple treat bag, and then I like to use some very pale E000 and E00 to color the white parts of the fox. I think this just softens it up and makes it look more realistic and less contrasting. Now I'm stamping my images that I used onto a full sticky back post-it note, and I'm going to use these as masks. I've used the dies to cut out the mask, so this will leave a little white line around my images, but I'm just going to peel those off the cardstock that I cut it against and line those up and place those over my images that I colored. This will protect them while I do some ink blending for the background. So now that I've got those little masks that I made on there, I'm going to go ahead and blend some ink on my pieces. So for the piece on the inside, I'm going with some purples. I'm starting with some milled lavender here, which is a pale purple, and I'm just going right around my image. So I want him to kind of have this lighter purple glow around him. Once I've got that on there, I'm going to go in with my wilted violet, and I'm going to work my way in from the outside. And I've put a piece of typing paper in there so I can just tap off some of that ink a little bit so I don't get too heavy, and I can build my ink up slowly. So you can see it kind of has a glow. I'm checking where my die is going to be, and I decided to go ahead and make sure that my ink went all the way up to that pencil line where that top's going to be. So I'm just going to mask that off and ink all of it. I didn't really have to do this because I ended up covering up the pull tab with a piece of black cardstock. I just didn't want that ink on there. But I also don't want it on there because I feel like when you put a lot of ink on a piece of cardstock, it kind of gets not as stiff as it was. It gets a little wobbly. It kind of loses its integrity slightly. So I want to keep that as strong as possible since it's the pull tab. I'm also going to add some gold flecks. In case you haven't figured it out yet, I really like to add some gold flecks to my projects, but it's just going to add some interest and shine when you pull that tab. So now to work on the other piece where my other fox is, I'm using some twisted citron, and I'm just going all over with this bright green color. So I only need to worry about the square where the fox is, because I'm going to be using the Magic Picture Changer add-on to cover up the rest of this pocket. So I'm going to be doing this ink blending on 3 different pieces. This piece with the fox, also the panel that covers it up, and also my card base. So instead of adding the gold flecks to him, I'm adding some spooky black paint splatters, which I just think has a really fun look. So now I have that add-on panel. I'm going to do the same thing I did to the fox, add that twisted citron all over that panel. And then once it's coated and covered the way I want it to be, I will also add the same black paint splatters so that it matches the fox. So it all kind of blends together as one panel. So I'll set that aside to dry, and now I'm going to work on the card base, which is just a piece of white cardstock cut with the stitch rectangle. I will layer this onto a card base before I'm done. And I'm adding that same twisted citron. I don't have to worry about covering the whole thing because the center is going to be covered up by my magic picture changer mechanism. Now I'm going to go in with some Lucky Clover and just darken up the corners so it kind of goes from the glowy green in the middle out to a darker green on the outside edges. And then of course, once I have this looking the way I want it, I'm going to add those same black paint splatters to this background panel as well. So now all three pieces will look consistent and it will all look like one bright green card that almost looks like it should glow in the dark because of this bright green color. But when you pull the tab, you're going to get that purple square in the center with that little bee. So now I'm going to pull off those masking pieces and reveal my beautifully colored bee underneath. I actually really like the little white border that this gives it. It almost looks like a die cut, but you don't have the thickness of a die cut that is exactly what you need for a magic picture changer to work properly. So now that my masks are off, I can die cut my pieces. So all I did was make sure that I lined up my little image inside the square of the die and ran that through my die cut machine. You can't see my pencil lines very much anymore because of all the ink blending, but that's okay. It was just a guide to stamp the fox in the right place on the paper. So now you use the window of the die and you can see I'm lining him up right in that window, and then I'll run that through my die cut machine and it's cut out in the right placement that it needs to be. Now to do some assembly of the magic picture changer mechanism. These little flaps on the side are very thin, but you want to fold them to the inside very carefully. You're going to do that on both sides, and then I'm just making sure the crease is nice and crisp with my bone folder. There's also a score line between the two pieces, and I just pulled out that little slot that it cuts, and I'm just going to fold that as well. So now I'm going to open everything back up and I'm going to grab my 1/8 inch double-sided tape. So this is the really thin tape. And you're going to want to put a piece on both sides of both flaps. So I've put a piece on the front of both flaps and now I've flipped it over and I'm going to put a piece on the back side of both flaps. And these are going to adhere down to the piece on the inside and make a track for the other piece to slide in. So you're going to go ahead and pull off the liner paper and fold those in, stick them to the card right there. So it makes a little track, and then I'm going to go over it with my powder tool to make sure there's no sticky stuff left that might catch the other piece of paper. Then you can take the inside piece and feed it through the slot, feed the little handle through the slot. Make sure it's centered in the track there, that's what I'm doing. And then what you want to do is you want to line up the little slots that it creates and feed these through. So there's 4 little pieces that you want to feed into each other. And then it should slide back and forth. Now, it's not closed yet, so it's kind of getting off track. But I also like to go over it with my powder tools so that everything has some nice powder there. A layer of powder makes it slide so much better. It has less traction. Then I'm going to pull off the other two liner pieces, make sure that's lined up between the little track that we've created, and close this pocket. And then this will help keep that slider piece in the middle straight. So it should slide a lot better. Now's a good time to kind of work it out, make sure it's sliding well. Now for the decorative panel that goes on the front, this is where you want the adhesive. You want it going diagonally in the corners and on the two short sides. If you put adhesive on the long sides, it will a lot of times catch the pieces that are sliding, and then your magic picture changer will stop working. This has happened to me before, so I promise you that it will happen. So you want to make sure that you put your adhesive exactly where I'm showing you. So on the two short sides and the corners. And then you line it up, and this die has a little notch, just a very small notch at the top, that lines up with the pull tab. And I'm always adding powder to mine so that it slides well. So now I'm going to use that die and cut a little black piece of cardstock that's going to layer over that white tab you see there. I'm just cutting off the extra pieces. I cut this tab a little bit longer than the white piece you see. That way it can be in the slot all the time, and you don't have that edge of the cardstock that might catch when you try to slide your magic picture changer back down into the pocket. So I'm just adding a little bit of liquid glue and layering that over the tab that's already there. I'm also going to use some purple cardstock to cut out the little decorative piece that goes on the top that tells you to pull the tab, and then you will see that black arrow through that die cut opening on that little decorative piece. And I actually used a binder clip to hold it because I used liquid glue. I want to make sure that sticks and does not come apart. So now I'm taking that back panel that I created, that stitch rectangle panel, and just layering that onto a card base. So I'm going to make a black kind of grassy bottom to this to ground my magic picture changer images. So I have a black piece of cardstock cut with that same stitch rectangle. I've added some anti-static powder to it, and I'm stamping part of my sentiment that I want to be white embossed on the bottom. So this part of the sentiment says, "Hope your day is extra sweet." And I'm going to add the words trick or treat above this to go with the rest of the sentiment. So I've just stamped that out in some clear embossing ink, added my white embossing powder, and I'm just heating that up with my heat tool. So once that's all melted, I will clean off that powder that I added to it so it'll be black again. But I'm using the new Trick or Treat line border die to add the first part of my sentiment, and I've cut that from some orange glitter cardstock. I'm laying that on there. I'm not gluing it down just yet so that I can figure out where I need to cut the grassy border for the top of this black grass that I'm creating. So once I've run that through my die cut machine, I can go ahead and I can add this glittery sentiment. And I'm just adding small dots of glue to the back of the die cut, and then I'll just layer that right above the sentiment that I embossed. And I'm lining it up on my grid mat to help me keep my line border die cut straight. And then I'll just trim off those extra pieces on the side. Of course, we don't want to forget the little dot and eye, the tittle. So I'm just going to pop that out, add that to the trick. And then I'll just trim off that line that extends past the side there. So this is going to go on the bottom of my card and cover up the bottom of that magic picture changer. I'm stamped out some pumpkins from the Pick of the Patch set, and I'm just adding some fun faces to them. These are going to go on either side of my magic picture changer image. in that black grass there to kind of complete the whole Halloween scene and look of this card. And I'm going to add some foam tape, and I'm making sort of a U shape there so that that magic picture changer will kind of slide down into that pocket that I'm creating. So now my magic picture changer will slide right in there. And I've actually got him popped up on some foam as well. So I did double foam on the grass on the bottom, and I'm doing a single foam on the back of the magic picture changer. I just think that adding the foam to this and popping it up a little bit gives you some space to grab hold of that pull tab really well and pull it to see that picture change. I am making sure that that tab doesn't go past the top so that it'll still fit in an envelope easily. And once I have that in place, I'll just stick it down. And now I'm going to decorate around the sides with my pumpkins. So one thing to remember when you're doing this and you're kind of overlapping your magic picture changer is to make sure you don't put any glue inside that square where those pieces need to move. So it's just something to be aware of. Really, the only pumpkin where that might be a problem is that little pumpkin there on the right. So I want to make sure that I only put the glue down in the grass for him. And actually, I decided I wanted to add some foam squares and pop him up. But again, I'm still making sure those foam squares, as you can see, are only on the bottom of that pumpkin so that he doesn't have any adhesive on the top where that magic picture changer mechanism might get caught. You still want it to move nice and freely. So I also added a little ghost bird there, and I've cut out some of the little treats that come in this stamp set, and I'm just adding those around my pumpkins to kind of go with the trick or treat sentiment that I added to this card. I really love that tiny little piece of candy corn. I just think it's so cute. And then here is the finished card. I love when you pull that tab that you get that pop of purple in the background. And I love that green. That spooky green looks like it should glow in the dark. So now I'm going to make a birthday card using this set to show you that you don't have to make Halloween cards. And I'm going to pair it with the Baked with Love using the cupcake and that little cake stand. I'm going to be using some of the Let It Shine paper. I'm using this stripe side, and then I'm also using some paper from the Petite paper pack. I love this light blue with the gold foil dots. So I've cut the stripe paper using a stitch rectangle that I'm just going to layer onto a card base. This is the outside in stitch rectangle, so you get that nice white border around it. And then I've cut that aqua color with the gold dots using another stitch rectangle, and I'm going to pop it up on some foam tape to create a panel in the center. I've cut a wavy banner from some peacock cardstock, and I'm just going to use the sentiment from Baked with Love. I'm using my actual die that I used to cut out the banner as a way to form my stamp because it's going to stick on it because this is a solid die. So I've got it face down and it's sticking to that metal die, and I've got it curved the way I need to, and then I can pick it up with the block and then just pop that die off. I'm going to white emboss this on this little banner, so I've added my anti-static powder. I'm going to stamp that in some clear embossing ink. And then I'm going to add some of that white embossing powder. And then I'll just heat that up with my heat tool till it's all nice and melted. I just think that the sentiment that says "Have a Sweet Birthday" is going to go perfectly with the little cupcake fox. So I'm going to add him standing on this cake stand, and I'm also adding his little friend dressed as a donut because, you know, he's a sweet treat too. And they're going to be the focus of my card, and then I'm going to add some cupcakes around the bottom. And I'm also using that bird that's not dressed up to stand on one of those cupcakes. So I'm just laying these here as placement, and I'm going to go ahead and put my sentiment banner on using some little foam squares. And now I can work on placing all these little images where I want them. So I'm going to go ahead and add that little bird to the cupcake. I'm putting these on some foam squares to pop them up too. And then I'll also just add the cake stand with that cute little fox sitting on it to the background. Now he's kind of set to the right, he's not centered, so I felt like he needed a little bit more, so I'm going to add a lollipop to his hand here in a minute to kind of balance things out. But first, I actually added some Stardust stickles to add some sparkle to all these cupcakes, and the sprinkles on the cupcake fox and the donut bird. And then here's that little lollipop that is also in that stamp set. But I just felt like it helped balance the top a little bit more since the fox was sort of off center. And then here is that finished birthday card. I just think it's so cute. You would never know that little fox came from a Halloween themed stamp set. So now let's take a look at some more cards from the design team. Audrey created this super cute spooky scene. I just love that spooky fence in the background and the trees and the spider web, and I love that beautiful purple sky that she created. Elise worked her magic with using those alphabet die cuts for a big bold sentiment that I think is super cute with these little foxes. And she also created this slimline card that I think is so sweet, and I love that she used one of the Lift the Flap trees. Megan's Magic Picture Changer is so fantastic. I love that purple background, and I love the birch trees that frame up the magic happening in the center. Lynette's Shutter card is just super cute, using all those little foxes and that Halloween sentiment in the shutter window. Tisha's card is super sweet. I love her clouds at the top, and that twine is the perfect touch. Tammy's card is so cute. I love that super moon that she created, and of course that inked background, and I love those black die cut birch trees. Elena also created a fun foursquare card. I love all those little foxes and the bats that she used, and she used the trick-or-treat border die for her sentiment, which I think is super clever. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.